Okay, well, today we're going to be learning about linear perspective. In chapter 2, we learned about space in two-dimensional art. So, linear perspective, and the activity is going to be a cityscape. Okay, so let's check it out. Linear perspective. What's linear perspective? So,
Have you ever looked at a painting and noticed that some objects appear close and others appear to be farther away?
¿Alguna vez han observado una pintura y han notado que algunos objetos parecen estar más cerca y otros parecen estar más lejos?
and our objective today is to identify linear perspective techniques used in art. You will have for an optional activity to create a one-point perspective cityscape using techniques to create depth. Art, history, and culture to demonstrate the knowledge of the lives and the work of Childe Hassam and Frederick Brosen. So let's look at these. Oops. So lesson 3 introduces linear perspective. Artists use linear perspective techniques to make things look closer and also make things look further away in the two-dimensional artwork. So we're going to be looking at the artworks on these pages. Notice how the artist brought some objects in the painting closer to the viewer and moved the other objects further away. Which of these New York City scenes appears to be modern? So what are the clues telling us? Which one looks modern? You probably can't tell until I actually zoom in. Look down the hallway in your house and compare the size of a nearby object to one that is further away. How does the size of these objects appear to change as you walk down the hallway? So let's look at this right quick. Study both works of art to find perspective. So let's look at this. I guess you kind of have to know what perspective it is to know what you're looking for. This is an American artist, and it's called Lower Manhattan, and it was painted in 1907. So we can see what objects in here can we see close up. So we can see that these obviously are buildings. Can't really make out the details too much. You can, however, see that the people down here, remember we said if it's at the bottom of the page, it means it's closest to us, and they're also bigger. And as it gets higher up on the page, the size, it's going to get a little smaller. And you look at the people over here, they're tiny, tiny, tiny compared to these people. So it's also higher up on the page, and it's further away, and you're not going to see a whole lot of details. You see more details right here. Okay, so then you're going to look at Frederick Brosen, and he's an American artist, and this is Watt Street. And as you can see, we can see perspective. We can see how the building's up close. Obviously, the car's up close, the stoplight. And as it gets further, you can see the details, everything gets smaller. Also, the details, you don't really see the details. You can just kind of see the outlines of things. But everything up close has more details than you can see. You can see how the road converges from one corner. There's a line, and then there's another one. And then everything gets smaller, smaller, so even the dotted lines in the middle. Let me zoom in and see. And then you can also see the buildings. And then you can see the sides of the buildings, not just the front, the face of the building. You can see the sides, and they kind of get smaller and smaller and smaller on the sides also at an angle. So what types of shapes are repeated in each painting, and how did artists make some shapes appear further away? Okay, well, we told you that. So if we know that these buildings are made out of squares and rectangles, and then there's also circles that are repeated in both paintings, okay, because the buildings are rectangular, and you have the windows that are square, and there are circles that are on here, and then the shapes are smaller as they move further away in both of them. So that's how they're both alike. Identify objects in the foreground, middle ground, and background. We talked about that already. I said in Hassam's painting, you can see the people in the foreground, buildings in the middle ground, and sky in the background, the buildings. And then in Brosen's paintings, car can be found in the foreground, and the street signs, buildings and sunlight in the middle ground, and sky and tiny little buildings in the background. Describe the use of details in both works. We talked about how the people in the front have more detail, and as you get further away, that's less. Same thing here. Okay, and we talked about that in the last lesson. So let's check this out. If you're a little fuzzy on perspective, let's look again. Perspective is the method used to create the illusion of depth on a flat surface. Artists use 1-point perspective to make viewers think that they are looking at an object that is further away than the rest of the image. Okay? And in linear perspective is one way of using lines to show distance and depth. In 1-point perspective, all of the lines that move back into space meet at a single line. Okay, so they have a blank sheet of paper and they've drawn the horizon line and they put a little dot right here, and then they draw lines to the corners, and then they basically line everything up on that line, and the thing that's in the front is the biggest. On the second part of the line, it's a little smaller, and it gets smaller as it gets to the dot. You can try that. Same thing with the building. They draw, and all the lines, they line up with the diagonal lines in the corner so that they are the correct proportion. The horizon line is the point at which the earth meets the sky. Remember, I always tell you guys to draw that line across the middle so we can tell where the ground and the sky is. So the horizon line is always at the viewer's eye level. Okay, so if there's a person here, wherever they're looking at, it's going to be right here. The vanishing point is the point on the horizon where all the lines meet. Okay.
Were you able to see linear perspective?
Okay. So if you were standing in a hallway at school, or you could do this in your house, like I said, the exercise was you could look down the length of the hallway. So if there was a dot right here, and we drew all the lines, see how the lines line up? And everything that's on this wall, it goes from larger and then it gets smaller. Same thing with the rug. Okay, so look down the length of the hallway. You'd point with each middle finger towards the lines where you see the metal meeting the wall beside you. Standing still, and move your fingers along those lines until they get to 1 point. Notice how your arms move together down to the eye level. So you can do this again, but this time point to the lines where the walls meet the floor. Same thing with the bottom. So you would take it and you would meet to where at the end of the hallway, and the same thing, your arms would move together so that you can actually see how it goes from out to in. Think about how this student used artists to use linear perspective. They did theirs kind of sideways. So they drew their horizon line. They put a dot there. They drew a line here and drew a line here. So they put a building here. And you notice that everything's up close, and then it starts to get a little smaller. See the trees in the background, and the road follows that line. So does the dotted line, and all the other lines line up. Any lines that go diagonal will be lined up with that line. Then you have tiny trees in the background on the mountains, and remember the mountains don't really have a lot of details. So when you're that far back, you can't really see details, but you can see the tiny little trees. They haven't gotten smaller. They're actually the same size of this. They just made them smaller to give the illusion that there's perspective on a piece of paper. How can you use 1-point perspective to create depth? You could try drawing a city using linear perspective. Think about a place that you've read about or studied and make several sketches of the objects and 2 or 3 buildings you want in your scene. So lightly draw a horizon line and make a point where these lines are going to meet. Draw at least 4 lines coming out from the vanishing point on the horizon line, and then you can paint or do your drawing. So here's an example. He has this piece of paper and he is using a ruler. He's drawing his horizon line, one line that goes straight across the middle, and he puts a dot right here, and then he's going to line all his stuff up and create some different types of perspective. There are different types of ways that you can do this, and when we get onto your Nearpod lesson, there should be an example of how to do it, and then you will be able to, that's if you get a Nearpod lesson. If not, you could look this up, and there are various ways of using perspective and different techniques that you can try if you look it up on the internet. And just to try different ways, you can find them on Pinterest. You can also find some videos on YouTube for that. So if you'd like to try that, and that's something that you want to do so you can make things look really, really neat instead of looking flat, it looks more 3D, go ahead and try out some of those techniques, okay? At the end of your artwork, when you do create one, you should be able to describe the cityscape that you created, and you should be able to name objects that you included in your picture. How did you use linear perspective in your work? Okay. What objects communicate the kind of scene that you created? Give your work a title. How could you apply this technique of linear perspective to another drawing? So far we talked about doing a city, so anytime, or the hallway, but you can apply it to any other type of artwork. You could draw a picture of something outside, and you could, how could you create that so that everything is lined up so it looks like it's going from large to small, from close up to far away. Experiment a little bit. Okay, so you've completed lesson 3. If I have assigned you a Nearpod lesson, please make sure you go to that and complete that and show me your work. If not, you're very lucky and you're done with everything that you need to do. So we will see you next week for lesson 4.